Welcome to the third in our series of whiteboards on the Lutheran Reformation. Today we're going to focus on the impact of the Lutheran Reformation and look particularly at what changed and what remained the same. Reformation, perhaps especially to Protestants, means that everything changed. What's interesting to think about first is what actually didn't change, what remained the same. And even Christians at the time noticed that in spite of the fact that there had been a Reformation, some things continued. For example, in spite of the hopes of some people in the 16th century, Protestants in Lutheran areas continued to have to pay their tithe. The tithe is the church tax that all Catholics paid to the Catholic Church before the Reformation. And after the Reformation, some Christians thought, hey, good, Reformation, we don't have to pay our tithe anymore. Aha! In fact, you still have to pay your tithe. Now you have to pay it to the government. And the government uses that money to fund the church. So the tithe continued to have to be paid. You didn't get away from that, even just because you had become a Protestant. In Lutheran churches, images continued to be used. Now, this is something that may be surprising to some people, and you can go into some Lutheran churches in Germany today, and you might not be sure if you're in a Catholic church or a Lutheran church. There's so many images around. Luther felt that images were what he called adiaphora, indifferent matters. In other words, you could keep them, you could get rid of them, it was up to you as a church body, as a church group. He felt that to get rid of the images very radically would be disruptive and disturbing to Christians at the time, and he felt it was better to work more slowly towards removing people's traditional practice of veneration of images, for instance. So Lutheran churches, by and large, not all of them, but by and large, retained images, decorative altars, the whole 9 yards. Lutheran churches also retained bishops. The bishops are a higher level of administrative authority in the Catholic Church. Luther retained the bishops in his new churches. So the model of administration, although the names had changed, the structure remained the same. Now, let's talk about things that changed. The most visible change that most Christians would notice immediately in their churches was that the number of sacraments from the Catholic Church's 7 had decreased, first to 3 and then to 2. The sacraments Luther retained at first were baptism, the Lord's Supper, and confession. Confession eventually kind of dropped down a level and was no longer considered a sacrament, so you're left with 2, baptism and the Lord's Supper. And that's a pretty big and drastic change for people, from the 7 sacraments they were used to down to 2. The next change that most everyone would have noticed, and it really had a significant impact at the time and subsequently, was the appearance of the German Bible. Now, we have to be clear. Before the Reformation, people did have access to Bibles. Not necessarily complete Bibles, sometimes the Psalms, sometimes other books of the Bible, in their own language, in Latin. Luther, however, worked very diligently on a single project, which was making sure that the entire Bible would be available in German, in the language of the people. The New Testament appeared in 1522, the whole Bible in 1534. The New Testament was largely Luther's own work. The 1534 whole Bible, that was a team of people, including Luther. And this Bible was very important in shaping the German language, because it was such a significant work. Luther really had a genius for expressing the text of the Bible in the language of the people of his day. Another big change you'd notice, clerical marriage. Your pastor can get married. Before the Reformation, clergy were meant to be celibate. Now they were meant to be married. The status of the pastor's wife, a very interesting one, worth thinking about what that would be like in that first generation. You get now churches that are what you might call territorial churches. That's a big change. Now the government pays the salaries of the pastors. They take in the tithe and they pay out the salaries to the pastor. Pastors are essentially state employees. That's a significant change. Worship moves largely, not entirely, but largely into the vernacular, the language of the people. That's a very significant change, which we'll think about further as we go on to the Reformation. And finally, there is no pope. That was a definitive split for the Lutherans. who no longer acknowledged the authority of the Bishop of Rome.